Alright, I am back with another video, and following up my last video in which I made a shinobi, people have asked me to have a look at the samurai subclass. For those of you that don't know, the samurai is actually a real subclass in tabletop, and its whole deal was it just meant to be really good at one thing: hitting people kind of hard. But not in the same way a paladin does, and it does come with a few more unique flavor things here and there. And again, this is kind of following the release of Assassin's Creed Shadows, as that is kind of the popular thing right now. I wanted to give it a go. But I've stayed away from samurai for a while for a reason. The more I look at samurai, the harder it is to build with. I don't think I've played with a subclass that is so hungry for levels just on its own since Beastmaster Ranger. Like, honestly, the less levels you take in Samurai, the worse off you're going to be, making multiclassing very difficult. Don't get me wrong, it's not as bad as Beastmaster Ranger, but I would still say that this subclass wants to go to level 11 unless you're playing very specific dual-wheel builds, which, again, we can talk about a bit later. But for the sake of taking the Samurai subclass to make an actual Samurai, well, that's what we're here to do. And I'll say this now, I apologise if my voice does sound a bit weird or the recording seems a bit off. I'm a bit ill, and I did lose my voice for a little bit there, but I'm hoping I'll be able to get through this whole recording without losing it again. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. Kicking things off, I decided to play as Will today. Obviously, again, kind of the relation to Assassin's Creed Shadows, but I almost like the idea that if he doesn't go to Avernus, like, maybe Will would wander the lands after the events of Baldur's Gate, and maybe would kind of learn to kind of overcome maybe the loss of his warlock powers through sheer discipline and, you know, learning about fighting and, like, becoming a proper fighter. I don't know, it just felt like a fun idea. Obviously, again, though, it is a nod to Yasuki from you know, Assassin's Creed Shadows, and honestly I do think, and also it kind of came in from a design point of view as well, because with Will's devil horns, you almost kind of get that, like, samurai helmet silhouette, so I actually did think it was a fun inclusion, and I wanted to give it a try. There was originally a version of this build that incorporated Spell Sniper with a bit more intelligence if you wanted to keep Eldritch Blast on this build, which could be a fun variation. But I wanted to focus more on just making a more traditional samurai for now, as my last samurai or ronin build did also use Eldritch Blast, so I thought I'd change things up a little bit and make this a post-game Will who has definitely stepped away from the warlock thing. But anyways, at fighter level 1 we're going to gain access to Second Wind, allowing us to heal ourselves as a bonus action. Because we're going to such high levels in fighter with this build, this is actually going to do quite a lot for us. And next up we do also get to choose a fighting style. Now obviously we've got all of the classic vanilla options, but if you're playing with Fighting Style Expanded, which, like for Samurai mod, is available on all platforms, I would absolutely recommend picking it up. You're going to get a few extra options, and I personally recommend Tunnel Fighter. As a bonus action, you can enter a defensive stance that lasts until the start of your next turn. While in your defensive stance, you can make opportunity attacks without using a reaction, and you can use your reaction to make a melee attack against a creature who moves within a certain distance of you. Now, the reason I like to build up kind of extra in-game effects into this build, as Samurai, well, it's because Samurai on its own doesn't have a lot, and again, we'll explain it as we go, but I thought Tunnel Fighter felt like it was on theme for this build, like you taking like a dueling stance like a samurai would, getting ready, waiting for your enemy to strike, and then you parry them, a bit Ghost of Tsushima-like. However, if you wanted to throw some monk levels into this build, as there is some synergy with monk with samurai, but I could suggest the unarmed fighting style to make your bonus action extra attacks hit a bit harder, as with that a bit of extra damage that you could deal, and you could also make this a dex build as well if you want to, entirely up to you. There's also blind fighting if you kind of want to play like the blind samurai warrior. You got some fun ones here. Interception could also be a fun one if you kind of want to play a more defensive character, but I like Tunnel Fighter here as just giving us an extra button to click that does cool things. Moving on to our ability scores, pretty standard heavy armor fighter spread here. Strength is at 17, so we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Dexterity is at 10 because we're wearing heavy armor. Constitution is at 14. I kind of would like this to be higher, but I wanted the other stats more. Intelligence is at 8. We don't need it, but you can use the Warped Headband of Intellect if you want that to be higher for some reason. Wisdom is at 14, as there are some abilities from Samurai that synergize with Wisdom specifically. As well as Charisma is at 12, because again, this is Will. I want a little bit of Charisma, and believe it or not, our Wisdom and Charisma are actually going to work together with Samurai. Yeah. This one's got some weird abilities, so let's talk about the skill proficiencies. Will is a folk hero, giving us access to animal handling and survival, which to be honest, are probably things that I would have chosen. Lots of samurai had to ride horses, animal handling makes sense, and survival, yeah, just being out in the wild makes sense, and I like having the folk hero background for this character because, I don't know, again, the wandering samurai being a hero in the eyes of the people, you know, it's a typical old, you know, samurai movie trope. We've also got access to any skill that we like because we are a human, so I went with persuasion. We've also got intimidation and athletics. I think that all makes sense when it's all said and done. Moving on to level 2 of Fighter, we're getting Action Surge. You all know what this does. You immediately gain an extra action, and you can use this once per short rest. When we level up to a high enough level in Fighter, this means we're going to be able to get a lot of attacks in a turn, which again is extremely important for Samurai specifically. Now, as we get to level 3, of course, we get to choose our subclass, and we'll be going with Psy Warrior today. I'm kidding, we're going with Samurai. Psy Warrior and Samurai kind of sound similar if you say it fast enough. Anyways, so, Samurai is a fighter who draws on an implaceable fighting spirit to overcome enemies. I had to read that for a second. A Samurai's resolve is nearly unbreakable, and the enemies in a Samurai's path have two choices: yield or die fighting. Pretty cool flavor. Let's look at the abilities. First up, we're going to get Fighting Spirit challenges. We get 3 of these per long rest. And there's issue number 1. So one of the reasons that Fighter is really hard to build with is that your main resource that you use for the bulk of your abilities is so limited. Compared to Battlemaster getting a lot more than 3 and can recover them on a short rest, having the ability to only use your Fighting Spirit abilities 3 times per long rest feels very limiting, especially in Baldur's Gate 3. Obviously, we can long rest as much as we like, so maybe it's not so much of an issue, but it does feel a bit strange compared to things like Battlemaster. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a dig at the mod creator. So Ragdonoff is an amazing mod creator who has made all of these subclasses for us, and is just keeping things as tabletop accurate as possible, which is what this is. So, fair enough, I'm happy to have the authentic, balanced experience here. You know, maybe it could come back on a short rest. Maybe that wouldn't be too broken. It might be a bit broken. Let's talk about what Fighting Spirit actually does. First up, Fighting Spirit. It allows you to gain advantage on all weapon attack rolls you make until the end of this turn, and you also gain 5 temporary hit points, with that amount increasing to 10 at level 10, I believe it is, and I think it increases to 15 if you go beyond level 12. So yeah, basically, it's a bit of temporary HP and advantage on all weapon attack rolls, as a bonus action and a cost of your Fighting Spirit. This is, in my opinion, okay. The extra bit of tankiness is nice as a fighter, but honestly, the gaining advantage on all weapon attack rolls thing just kind of feels like a more limited version of Barbarian's Reckless Attack. Yes, Barbarian does come with the disadvantage of having all attacks have advantage against them, but as a Barbarian, you pretty much counteract that anyway, especially if you're playing Wild Heart Bear, so Fighting Spirit being as limited as it is feels strange, which is again another reason why you want to go as high as you can in Fighter with this build, because you want to make the most out of that single turn of advantage as you possibly can. So of course, getting as many attacks in a turn between extra attack and action surge, all while attacking with advantage, that's going to feel great. I mean, you have a higher chance to crit and all that, but again, having that resource be so limited when, again, Reckless Attack from Barbarian exists, feels a bit weird. This feels like a slightly worse version of just a regular Barbarian, but again, when we get to the later abilities, you'll see that this has some merit. Speaking of immediately, we're actually going to get to choose another skill proficiency here. We have a lot of the ones that Samurai already gives, but we have a few options to choose from. At this point, we can have History, Insight, or Performance. And also Persuasion would be an option if we didn't take it from our human ability. I would say I like Insight here, since we don't have musical instrument proficiency, but you could try and pick that up if you wanted to. At Fighter level 4, we get to choose our first feat, and you actually have 2 choices here as far as I'm concerned. If you want a vanilla feat that I think works really well for this build, go for Heavy Armor Master. This will increase your strength by 1, as well as make it so that you take less damage from non-magical attacks while wearing heavy armor. Of course, we wear heavy armor with this build, so that means that you will have a -3 to the damage that you take. I'm sorry, my brain is all over the place today, but basically the damage you take is going to be decreased by 3. Overall, pretty strong. It's going to make you a bit more tanky. I would say this build has 2 variants. The more tanky version that uses this alongside the tough feat later on, or the version I'm going to be showing off, which is going to use 2 other feats. So if we scroll down to Tasha's feats down here, again, available on all platforms, you're going to gain access to Slasher. Slasher is a fun one. Whenever we make a slashing attack, you reduce the target's movement speed, which is very good. That means all of our katana attacks are going to make it, so enemies have a harder time moving around us. And on a critical hit, we apply the slashed condition, making it so the affected entity's attack rolls have disadvantage. So we have a way of giving ourselves advantage, again through tons of attacks, as well as being able to impose disadvantage on our enemies. So we gain the upper hand in a one-on-one duel, which I think is very, very fun. And if someone tries to run away, well, they can't because that's dishonorable. You will cut them down. Overall, I really like this feature for the build. Again, because we're going to be able to attack so many times in a turn, critical hits are quite likely, which means this debuff can be applied fairly frequently, as long as your luck is good. And of course, we're going to bump up our strength. At fighter level 5, we're going to have access to extra attack. This is the first of 2 that we're going to be getting, meaning that we can now attack twice in a turn, which again just synergizes with everything Samurai does. At fighter level 6, we get to pick up another feat, and at this point, you've got a choice as well. Like I said before, you could take Heavy Armor Master, the tough feat, you know, all of that stuff that can give you a bit of a defensive buff. Well, we have 18 strength at this point, so I think it makes sense to grab Great Weapon Master, because of course we are. We're going to be making a ton of attacks in a turn with advantage using the two-handed katana weapon. There's no reason not to take Great Weapon Master on this build, and again, whenever you land a critical hit or kill a target with a melee weapon attack, you can make another melee weapon attack as a bonus action that turn. Again, we're going to be attacking so many times with our abilities that critical hits will be more likely, or we're absolutely going to kill someone, meaning that we just get another attack as a bonus action. This is Samurai to a T. Samurai loves this. The only thing is, between this and Tunnel Fighter and activating our Fighting Spirit, we are a little bit bonus action heavy. So I could see someone, especially if they're doing a dual wielding build, making an argument for using Thief Rogue. But then obviously we don't get Great Weapon Master on a dual wield build, so you kind of have to pick and choose what to do in every moment. So feel free to play around as you go through the build, but again, that additional 10 damage is great, and even though we have that attack roll penalty, again, advantage and all that, it's really not going to matter that much. At fighter level 7, we're going to get an interesting feature called Elegant Courtier. The interesting thing about samurai is they actually do take into the fact that, like, you know, samurai come from noble families and they're well-spoken and yada yada yada, allowing us to, whenever we make a persuasion check, we gain an additional bonus equal to our wisdom modifier, so we're adding our charisma and our wisdom. And additionally, you can choose to gain proficiency in wisdom, intelligence, or charisma saving throws. I think this is a really cool feature. D&D and BG3 as a whole don't do enough flavor features like this, and while it does feel a bit weak, I guess, compared to some of the other, you know, subclass features that fight against, like here we'd be getting more Battle Master stuff if we were a Battle Master, we'd be getting War Magic as an Eldritch Knight, you know, that, and Champion is Champion, but honestly, I do feel like this is a fun feature, and honestly, gaining another saving throw proficiency is really cool. Now, the way this actually worked in tabletop is that you would always get the wisdom saving throw proficiency you couldn't choose, but if you had wisdom saving throw proficiency, you could choose intelligence or charisma instead. So, but because that sort of thing was a bit limiting and coding that was a bit tricky, the mod author just said, hey, you just get to choose. I ended up going with wisdom saving throw proficiency because we have a decent wisdom score, and I do find wisdom saving throws to be the most dangerous to fail, so I think that makes sense to go with that here. At fighter level 8, we are going to get access to another feat, and I would definitely say at this point you could take an ability score improvement and max out that strength to give us the best odds of hitting and the best damage. At fighter level 9, we're going to be getting Indomitable, allowing you to, whenever you fail a saving throw, you can roll it again using the new result instead. I believe this is once per short rest, so overall a pretty powerful feature. At fighter level 10, we're going to get another samurai feature, allowing you to, and this is actually where it gets a bit better, whenever you roll initiative and have no uses of fighting spirit remaining, you regain 1 use. So at the start of combat, if you have used all of your fighting spirit, you get one more. Again, it's still kind of limited, but at least you're not limited to 3 per long rest. It comes back per encounter, it's not even short rest limited. So you can see when you save it for that one decisive blow, or that one Nova round of damage, it can be really good. But obviously having to go all the way to level 10 just to make the resource management slightly more bearable. Again, you can see why Samurai is so greedy for levels. Now, I would say at this point, a 1 or 2 level dip into Monk would absolutely make sense for this build. Heck, Ranger could also work. I could see some shenanigans going on there. Like, or even the Rogue dip as well to get the bonus action movement and such like that. Like, I can see where it would work, but I feel like you really have to go to level 10 of Samurai to really get the most out of the resource management, and at that point, you might as well go all the way into Fighter, getting improved extra attack, now able to make 3 attacks in a turn, with advantage, with Great Weapon Master, all of that shebang. You're just going to be doing a lot of damage. And then, obviously, going to level 12, you're going to get an extra feat, which can really help round out the build. Now, of course, you've got a bunch of options. Bump up your con, whiz, or a charisma. Whatever you want to do there. You could go for Sharpshooter even. We have advantage on all of these attacks. Maybe we could get it with ranged attacks as well. Samurai were known for using bows, so Sharpshooter could make you a great fighter in all aspects of play, which, again, can help you with the, resource management, because maybe you can't get close enough to an enemy to bop them with your sword. You can still just shoot them with your bow. So honestly, that's probably the power gaming move. However, I like 2 other options if we're mainly focusing on the use of the Katana. First up is the Charger Feats, which I did use in my testing. It's basically another way to get a weapon attack that does a little bit more damage, but it does also use your bonus action, so you're going to have to pick and choose where you want to get it, but it doesn't provoke opportunity attacks when you move, so there's definitely something to work with there. But otherwise, if you want a more tanky variation of the build, take Tough or the aforementioned I would say Heavy Armor Master. I think both work well for giving you just that bit of extra tankiness, with Tough landing you at a solid 124 HP. But otherwise, I think Sharpshooter is the offense option, and you do just have a few other cool things there. Like I said, Charger. Now that I think about it, the bonus action thing might not be worth it. Again, we are very bonus action heavy, which is why you may appreciate something like the Helmet of Grit on this build. I don't know, you gotta play around with this one. Again, this is more of a showcase? Oh my god. Showcase of the mod, in which you can kind of play around and mess with things as you like. Again, there's some build variety here, but I really do think Samurai benefits the most from a single level build without multiclassing. That's just my personal preference. Maybe even Savage Attacker is also a good thing as well. Honestly, it's entirely up to you. Pick your favorite. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this one is a lot of bloody attacks. As I said, we are a full fighter, and our whole thing is using advantage from fighting spirit to do big damage. We're going to be able to attack upwards of 3 attacks in a turn normally, and then going even further beyond, if we manage to kill someone, we can do a bonus action attack. Action Surge, we can do 6 attacks. Heck, I even have a way to get even more attacks in here. But the problem, and obviously we have a bit of extra stuff to work with. We can be the face of the party, using both our wisdom and charisma to help make those persuasion checks, allowing us to be quite a suave individual, as well as the fact that we have a well-rounded skill set when it comes to our skill proficiencies as well, because you get extra stuff there. You know, there is a lot going for this build. I think just the actual gameplay of it is going to be quite simple. But for a fighter, being good in all of these different aspects of play, basically combat and social, is actually really cool, and I think it does give that little niche to Samurai that other classes and subclasses really can't claim to, because obviously, but then again, Paladin exists. You want a powerful fighter that does big damage and also has high charisma that can do good social stuff and be the face of the party. Yeah, Paladin exists, and honestly, Samurai just does feel like a worse version of Paladin in some ways, and I hate saying that, but because I think the idea of the Samurai is really cool, but I think it could have been done better. Oh well, this build is still good, it's still really strong, so let's have a look at the equipment to see how we get that samurai vibe. Anybody else play Super Paper Mario? It doesn't matter. So, first up, we got to address an elephant in the room here, the katana itself. Normally, the only katana available to you in BG3 is obtainable in Act 3 and is a +1 longsword. To play the whole game as a samurai without a katana until Act 3 doesn't feel right. So for the first time ever on the channel, this is a channel first, I'm recommending an equipment mod. Available on all platforms is the Eastern Super Pack, giving you access to katanas, odachis, which are two-handed katanas, and wakazashis, which are like daggers, available right from the get-go. You'll be able to pick them up in a bag at the tutorial chest in the opening act on the Nautiloid, in which case you'll have access to a ton of different katanas. Now, these katanas can range from having multiple different damage types. You know, you can gain an extra bit of d6 damage, like cold, fire, whatever, but I think those are all a bit strong, so I recommend just sticking to the basic katanas. It'll give you a basic katana with no additional damage boost, a +1 katana, like the vanilla, and eventually a +3 katana if you so desire. There's also a +2 katana, which I used for the testing of this build, because I feel like that's the average strength of most endgame weapons. Now, obviously this means, yes, you would have access to a +3 weapon, literally in the tutorial, but I like to think that if you're watching my channel and you know how I go about my build making philosophy, you would probably show restraint, starting off with the base katana, allowing yourself to use the +1 eventually as you go through Act 1, maybe after saving the grove, then +2 in Act 2, and then if you feel like it, +3 in the endgame. So, entirely up to you how you want to go about that, but like I say, you will probably show some restraint overall. Now, I don't have a bow for this build, as again I wanted to focus more on the katana aspect, but I definitely recommend the Titan String bow, as it would be a kind of powerful bow for this build. Just be aware that we do have lower dexterity. If you want to focus on using a bow, you might need to pack the gloves of dexterity as well. Otherwise, that would be a powerful option. Throwing on Sharpshooter, you know, do what you got to do there. Or again, if you throw in that level of monk, you can make this a dexterity-based build instead. In which case you want a different bow, maybe the Darkfire short bow to give you haste, getting more out of those fighting spirit turns. You know, there's a lot to use for the range slot, so use your better judgment. So, moving on to the equipment. First up, the Helm of Baldurin. I've decided to go with this one today because, well, it's Will, the hero of Baldur's Gate. Kind of makes sense to have the Helm of Baldurin, as well as this helm combined with the Devil Horns of Will does kind of give that samurai silhouette, as I was saying before, meaning that I just think for the first time ever, I actually think this helmet looks quite good. And the fact that it matches the rest of the armor, none of this is, except for the cape is dyed, by the way, I don't know, it just feels right, so I really like the look of it. Overall though, as far as abilities go, it's going to give you the ability to heal 2 hit points at the beginning of every turn, giving you a +1 bonus to armor class and saving throws, stun immunity, and critical hit immunity, meaning that we're going to be a pretty damn tanky build as well. Again, throw on that tough feat if you really want to lean into that. For the early game, I can't really say there's anything I would deliberately recommend that's that good. But something like the Haste Helm or the Grimskull Helm, if you want kind of a lesser version of the Helm of Baldurin, would both work. Totally forgot to get the Grimskull Helm for this build. You know, it's just how this channel runs at this point. Moving on, the Cloak of Protection. I wanted a cape on this build, so Cloak of Protection, but really, you don't need it. You do have a 20 AC with regardless, but 21 is better than 20, so there you go. It's going to help you with your saving throws as well. Moving on, the Splint Armor +2, giving you 1 less piercing damage and a +1 bonus to strength saving throws and checks, although it does make you have disadvantage on stealth. Why have we picked this? Because it's the samurai armor. This is basically the only armor set in the game that actually looks like samurai armor. You know, you get the little bit in the middle, the shoulder pads, you know, the whole way the armor's designed. It looks like samurai armor, so that's why we've gone with it. But in the early game, you can go for the adamantine splint armor, which, if you squint at it, no, it doesn't look like samurai armor by comparison, but still it's got some abilities. It reduces incoming damage, can inflict reeling, and also has the critical hit immunity. But we get most of that from the Helm of Baldurin now anyway, so the splint armor is going to feel just as good without it. Moving on though, we have the Martial Exertion Gloves. I decided I wanted to take that most amount of attacks in a turn thing even further. I just punched my microphone, apologies. Martial Exertion is going to give us the ability to push past our physical limits, taking 3 to 36 piercing damage, ouch, but we do reduce a little bit of it from the splint armor, allowing you to double your movement speed and gain an additional attack. This is like Action Surge Light. Basically, you're getting another attack, which is pretty damn good, allowing you to go absolutely all out. There's no resource cost for this other than your short rest, so even if you've exhausted all your action and bonus action activating all your other abilities, you can still do this. Now, I would say this is where the build could also get that synergy with the Helmet of Grit if you decided to go down that route, because of course, this amount of damage could put you into that 50% HP range, allowing you to gain that extra bonus action, so feel free to play around with that one a bit. And finally, for the boots, we do just kind of have the Boots of Persistence here. You gain freedom of movement, which is going to mean that you have, movement speed cannot be reduced by difficult terrain, spells or magical effects, you cannot be paralyzed or restrained, great, and you're also going to get long strider for more movement speed. It just helps you move around the battlefield a bit better. Otherwise, you can throw on the evasive boots if you want more AC, and as a decent early game option. For the amulet, which I somehow forgot to put on this build, I've decided to go for the Fey Semblance amulet. Now, this is going to give you advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, so any of the saving throw proficiencies that you chose earlier will be a lot better. But it's also worked quite well because I like the idea of Will having this charm on him, so that he doesn't get influenced by outside forces ever again after finally escaping his warlock pact, so just a bit of fun. But for our 2 rings, we have the Caustic Band. Now, normally just a flat 2 damage on every attack, while it sounds good in theory, isn't always the best in practice over some of the more powerful effects. But for us, who can be making, I don't know, 8 attacks in a turn sometimes, like, that extra 2 damage is going to add up, so I actually think it is worth it on this build, but it's a free choice, feel free to change it out. And finally, the Whispering Promise. We're going to be getting healed every turn, or healed by our party members. Might as well give ourselves Bless when we do so, giving us a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws. This just means that whenever the Helm of Baldur heals us, which is every turn, we're just going to get a better way to offset the Great Weapon Master penalty, even without the advantage active if we don't have it up, and saving throws, again, taking advantage of those multiple proficiencies that we can possibly get. So yeah, overall, pretty solid kit here. Can't believe I forgot the amulet. Although it wasn't integral to the combat footage anyway, so, it's whatever. The only thing I would say for the fashion, obviously no camp clothing being used here, and we did use the red dye from the vanilla game for the cloak of protection to get the red look to fit the rest of the build. But yeah, that is the build, and what can I say? If you want to play a Great Weapon Master fighter, here you are. Pretty goddamn simple. Overall, a lot of what Samurai does is flavor-based. You get a bit of stuff to help you be the face of the party, you get a bit more defensive options with the ability to gain an extra proficiency, all that's well and good. Being able to use your wisdom for charisma checks is also something very unique, and again, I love that kind of niche design in these types of games. But overall, again, the subclass itself is definitely a byproduct of its time. It doesn't feel as strong as a full power paladin when it kind of feels like it's trying to do the same thing. It's also not as good at being the face of the party as some other things. Don't get me wrong though, I could definitely see where Samurai could have some potential combos, but if you want to build a Samurai with that kind of vibe, and not just using the subclass abilities, yeah, you kind of want to just play a straight fighter. Obviously, being able to just give yourself advantage whenever would be powerful on a rogue build, for example, basically guaranteeing sneak attack at any point that you need it, which is great, but then you're also sacrificing extra attack if you want those high sneak attack damage rolls, which, again, I guess you could technically go like for a 5-7 split, and then multiclass into Thief Rogue. That's another potential build for the future. But again, you wanted the Samurai, I've given you the Samurai. So that's what this is. I do think overall you've got a pretty solid kit here. I like the idea of this Samurai just pushing past the physical limits to do as much damage in a turn as they possibly can, going for an absolute flurry of blows, a bit of anime in there. Again, martial exertion, really fitting that vibe. So yeah, overall I think this is a cool subclass flavor-wise, but I do think mechanically it does fall short compared to other options that are already in the game. I mean, Reckless Attack is just sitting right there, and it kind of just overshadows the whole thing's gimmick, which is a shame. If I was to make changes to Samurai, I can't really say much off the top of my head because I'm not a game designer, but I definitely think I would go play more into like a counterplay style, patiently waiting for your opponent to strike, and then when they do, being able to retaliate with a powerful counterattack. I feel like that is something that's actually kind of unique that we haven't really explored yet in tabletop. Don't get me wrong, I guess in the actual tabletop sense and where this subclass comes from, it would be kind of hard to implement that in a way that's fun, because for the player, they're just going to say, I'm going to wait for the DM to do something every single turn, and then the DM either has to literally walk right into my trap every single time for my build to be effective, or they just ignore me and then I get nothing. I guess it depends on like your table dynamic and how much of a good relationship you have with your DM to make something like that work. But in something like Baldur's Gate, maybe that could be a fun homebrew class mod for someone to make, something that's based on counter-attacking, and I actually think that could be a really cool build idea that again plays into that like duelist patiently waiting type thing. You could even make it like a dual thing, like for a ranger, it's more of like a quick draw cowboy type thing, where it's like quick, like who shoots first, where for samurai, it's about who strikes first and how, you know, they manage that, right? Like how they approach that attack. Like, do they counter? Do they dodge? What do they do? Like, there's so many different interesting flavors that I think could come from samurai, other than just attack harder for a little bit of time. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on Samurai. Overall, if you want to play the Samurai class subclass mod, this is a powerful build that is going to really feel good to play in the moment. Again, the resource management, you have to focus on that a bit. But again, long rests in BG3 aren't as much of a big deal as in tabletop. So overall, you're going to get a lot out of this if you want to play a Samurai. Otherwise, barbarian paladin. Very fun build. Alright, that's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time when hopefully my voice doesn't sound as bad. Bye-bye.